Hi, I'm Genevieve LeMarchal. I am the managing partner and founder of Suncoast Ventures. Suncoast Ventures is a seed stage healthcare fund. We focus specifically in health impact and health equity.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in and welcome to the VC Architects, the podcast where we share the real stories behind new VC fund managers and the blueprints used to make them successful. My name is Vlad Cazacu and I'll be your host today as we interview Genevieve LeMarchal, a management consultant turned sales leader and operator finding her life's path into venture capital and startup acceleration. This is such a unique episode with a person who followed her passion to help others be successful and opened up about the full story, challenges, and successes included. For more information about starting and growing your venture fund, including show notes, highlight clips, and exclusive scenes, follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the VC Architects, as well as on our website at thevcarchitects.com. This episode is brought to you by Flowlie, the number one choice for deal screening and network management, used by hundreds of investors from 50 plus different countries. Now, let's dive right in. Genevieve, such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this conversation. I'm really excited to learn more about you and Suncoast Ventures.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Absolutely. And I would like to start the conversation, before investing was really even on your radar screen, right? Like back to some of the very first early days in the career, right? From management consultant to CX lead to founder, you've really had a lot of different hats. So explain to us a little bit of the pre-investing Genevieve journey.
Yeah. Actually, I didn't know what a startup even was. So it wasn't even that I didn't even know what investing was. I didn't know what a startup was. I started my career, my intention was to become a journalist. And I actually didn't want to be in business at all. To me, business was wearing pantyhose in a cubicle. And, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be out in the world and solving interesting problems. And I just didn't really think that that was business at the time growing up. But one of the things that was interesting is when I was a young girl, my mother worked in an office with commercial real estate investors. And so I was around investing my whole life, not just around the actual practice of, the paperwork and, what's actually the boring part of investing, but surrounded by investors. And my parents were building relationships and socializing, and these people were a part of my life. So I didn't actually know when I was growing up that these people who were investors were not just our friends. And so I would say it was the seed was being planted, but I didn't actually realize that was going on until I was probably in my 30s, and knowing that these social events and these things that we were having and parties and things at our house were our friends were actually our investors as well. And so my first career as a journalist and as a writer, I was led that way because I wanted to be creative and because I had a curiosity about the world and I wanted to find out why things were the way they were and how, I might be able to tell these stories. And it hadn't yet occurred to me that perhaps I could impact the world in any way, but I was curious about it. And so I think that's kind of where it all began, but I didn't ever think it was business and I didn't ever obviously think it was investing. So I was always interested in entrepreneurship naturally, but I didn't know it was entrepreneurship. I just thought I was working on cool projects and doing stuff. And so I remember having a business in my college dorm room and doing a very early like e-commerce, eBay-based type store when I was in college and having no idea, never putting two and two together that it was a business. I just thought I was having some fun and making enough money to, go do some things with my friends and pay some of my bills in school. And so my journey to becoming a venture capitalist and eventually become an entrepreneur in the early days, it was not deliberate or even mindful at all. And so I'd like to be able to say, I thought about this and this was my strategy. And it's like, no, it really wasn't. I think I had a lot of experiences that just rolled into one thing, into the other thing, into the other thing. But I didn't really have the intention to get here. Much did I even know that here, where we are, was even a thing that you could do. So yeah.
It was not even on the radar screen on that time. And it's interesting how when one thing led to another. So I would like to explore that, right? Before the very first investor, you had a number of entrepreneurial parts of and episodes of your journey.
Mhm.
So I want to zoom in a little bit on that particular aspect and some of the successes, but also some of the failures and how that brought to the conversation of now I think I can support other founders and additionally invest in them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely have learned a lot more from the failures than I have from the successes. And I would probably say, at least through my 20s and my early 30s, my life was not a string of successes. My career was a string of failure and learning and just kind of rolling into the next thing, into the next thing, into the next thing, continuing to try. So I really, at that time in my life, I built up a lot of resilience. And I think today that's one of the things that is the best quality I have and stands out the most about me that I've been told by LPs and other collaborators is that my resilience is, sort of the thing that seems to be, you know, one of the best qualities. Some people have this incredible intellect and, some people have different things. And I, I just keep getting up when I fall down. So I think you do learn so much from your failures, and it taught me to become wise very early. So I think I developed wiseness. I don't know if wiseness is a word. At an earlier age than I might have otherwise because of how much I have failed. Some of the failures were small failures or missteps or things that just didn't really pan out. And I've had some crippling, horrible failures. And so they ultimately, if they don't break you, they'll make you wise. And you can decide what to do with that. Now you have this wisdom. Do you want to do something with it or do you want to just have it? And in my role as a VC, I decide to do something with it every single day and help entrepreneurs avoid the mistake that I made. So I'll often tell entrepreneurs, I don't actually know how to be successful. I don't think anyone does. I actually think it's luck. And you can read any book you want and hear any interview with any successful person you want about how to be successful. But I think it's just don't fail and keep going until you get lucky. So I'm like, I can't really help you be successful. We can try, but I can help you not fail. And let's do that.
I think this is the perfect industry to put that skill set to good use. I mean, everybody talks about the power law and fundraising in general. Before even we talk about the outcomes
Yeah.
of investing, right? Fundraising in itself, it's a hard, lengthy, feel of rejection
Oh
process
my gosh.
where resilient people
People
are,
have
are
no
really
idea.
the ones who, get up
Yeah.
and continue to do it.
I had no idea. I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be able to raise a fund. And I still see people, even people who you would think would know it's hard, still think it's going to be easy. And it's like, no, until you are actually that one pulling in those checks. Yeah, no.
Right, it's one of those things that you kind of have to feel on your own skin to
Yeah,
be able to appreciate it and see and empathize with others who are going from a similar journey.
a
um
1,000%. Yeah.
so I'm curious because now we got to the point where you are thinking about supporting other founders and getting into a role of VC, and you didn't start your journey in venture capital with your own firm. You started
No.
initially with another firm. So
Mhm.
walk me through that decision process of moving from the builder side to the investor side and how that went for you.
Yeah, actually, I would love for it to have been a decision process, but I'll tell you what actually happened. So I was passionate about helping other entrepreneurs because that was something I knew I could contribute. I had a little bit of knowledge. And by a little bit, I mean maybe 6 months more knowledge than some of the other peers I had. And I started teaching entrepreneurs in my kitchen how to build sales pipeline. At the time, I was living in Portland, Oregon, that has a very nascent and very small startup community. There's not a lot of investors. There's not a lot of investment activity going on up there. But you and I both know it doesn't matter where you go, you're going to find people innovating, you're going to find entrepreneurs, you're going to find it. I believe there will always be a market for what we are doing because we are human beings, and humans are always going to be creating and reaching and building. So there was that going on. And so I started teaching people how to build sales pipeline and basic concepts of how to do campaigns and things like that, because the drumbeat that I had kind of going in, make money, don't raise money, because customers can pay you today and you don't have to pay them back, And so people were coming to my house and bringing laptops, and I was teaching people what I knew about how to do this. And light bulbs were kind of going off because the culture for so many founders is raise some money and then go build your thing. And I was basically flipping that on its head, which seems very basic, but saying, build the thing, get the customers, and then the investors won't be able to deny that we have a business or we're onto something. And so that eventually grew and grew to the point where, as founders, we could not do any more sales because we were bursting at the seams in our businesses. We were falling apart, and it was like, more sales will actually hurt us. We need to bring in some sort of infusion of capital so we can tool up, so we can scale, so we can bring in some resources so that we can kind of make that jump to the next plateau and grow again. And that was when we started to kind of realize there seemed to be some systemic inequities. We were like, well, this is odd. Why is it that, that company over there could raise money, but we're being told, as this group of us who all happen to be women, that we don't have enough traction or we don't have enough proof of concept. And we couldn't understand why that was. And so this was back before there was a big conversation going around venture capital in the entrepreneurship world about less than 3% of venture capital dollars were going to women. And so when we found this information out, which required quite a lot of digging, we started going to some of these institutions and telling them this stuff. And they were like, no, that can't be the case. There's no possible way that women running venture fundable, backable businesses are getting passed over for funding. Why would that be? So we had to basically prove it. And so we started this organization called Accelerate. And the whole point of starting Accelerate was that we had to show that there was a strong and healthy pipeline of women-led businesses that needed support and access to funding, and they weren't getting it. And we also created a loan funding mechanism at the time because we were like, well, we're cash flowing and we've got the money to service some debt. So why don't we just do a loan and design our own loan program? So I was doing that, and I caught the attention of a very small VC firm and an investor in particular who I had a friendship with. And he calls me one day and he said, Genevieve, I think you should become a VC. And I'll never forget the conversation because I was standing in line for a Euro sandwich at a Greek deli. And I started to laugh and I said, that's hilarious, Chris. I was like, I'll wire you $15 million tomorrow. Just goes to show how little I knew, about venture. And I was like, oh, my sandwich is done. I'll call you later. Hung up the phone completely. It was like, oh, Chris is funny, hilarious, And so he kept staying on me for months and months. And then one day an agreement landed in my inbox, and it was a basic carry share agreement that said, if you bring us these companies that are focused on growth and on sales, and if you bring us these founders who are out there building stuff because you know them, we'll give you some carry on the companies that you help us with. And I thought, all right, that seems like it could be fun. I don't know. We'll see. I was very much a dabbler in the beginning. I attended meetings when I felt like it. I would help with due diligence when I felt like it. It wasn't really like anywhere near a full-time job, but that's how I got started in venture.
I love this sort of accidental, but at the same time, it feels like everything was really kind of coming together in a really beautiful and organized way, which usually happens.
It does now,
in
looking
life,
back.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly. It doesn't feel
so
in
much
the moment.
Angst. Yeah.
But there was a point where you said, I think this is what I want to do for a number of decades moving forward. And that for sure was a decision. Like, I won't buy an answer which that happened. So I'm curious, let's go back to the genesis of Suncoast Ventures and how they really come about.
Yeah, it was a decision. So I continued with the sales training. I was still teaching these sales boot camps to founders who were non-salespeople, so engineers and product people, teaching them how to really get over the mindset blocks that they were having around not just starting their companies, but offering what they had created to the world in the form of getting paid, aka sales, And so I was doing that, and that's how I was making money. And I was not making money in venture capital. I was dabbling. I had a seat at the table. And I didn't realize how valuable that was. I had no idea at the time that by being given a seat at the table, I had a golden ticket. And so as the years went on, and this wasn't like 3 months later I would decide to become a VC. It was years of dabbling and very slowly getting more and more and more involved over time. There came a point when I realized I was good at it. But that was a couple years in when I thought, that's interesting. I have got this brain, that seems to grasp this stuff. And I also realized I had built this network and I had this ability to connect with founders in a unique way. And so there came a point, and this was before Suncoast was even a blip, when I sort of realized I had to make a decision. I could be a sales trainer or I could be a VC. And I knew up until that point, this multi-passionate thing, doing all these different things and building all of this skill set and expertise in all these different areas was serving me, but I needed to focus if I wanted to really grow. And so it was actually something I mulled over for a while and thought about. And I just came to the conclusion that I was given a gift in terms of the opportunity to have a seat at the table and learn venture. And I had an opportunity to differentiate myself as a female in venture and do something really different. And it would require me to sacrifice a lot in the short term. I could be a sales trainer. I would make more money in the short term, but I would be just another sales trainer. There's a lot of those. And so I decided I would make some short-term lifestyle changes and sacrifices in order to pursue the venture capital path. And I would stop doing the sales training. And it was a very, very definitive decision I made.
Interesting. It feels like it was the area where long term was the biggest leverage around the impact that you were looking to make
Yeah.
on this world, and you were really the person to fulfill that mission. So I would like to understand, moving from something that you're truly passionate about, that you have the skill set to do, that this is really a mission that you want to dedicate your next few decades on, to a fund. And usually the missing ingredient is capital, right? That very first LP that says, you know what, Genevieve, I agree with you. Here is $15 million to do it, right? Maybe not that lucky from the very first check, but help us understand, who was the very first person who believed in this, and how did that kind of transform from one person to a fund?
Yeah. So I dabbled in a couple different funds before I had, like you're saying, the LP back me. And so I had the opportunity to learn and continue to have a seat at the table in different funds. And that's how I ended up actually in healthcare, was because I had a role in a deep tech, intellectual property focused fund, and I loved it. And I thought, this is my forever home. I am staying here. I'm kicking off my shoes. I was not a general partner. I was just a partner. So I didn't have a lot of visibility into some of the other operations of the fund, and that fund ended up not working out. And it was really difficult because this was 2020. I had moved during this time from Portland, Oregon to San Diego, California. And I didn't know anybody. I'm not kidding, 3 people, and one of them was a cat. And I say that all the time, but it's full true. I knew 3 people and one was cat. And what's funny is the other 2 ended up becoming LPs. But so in my mind, I was like, I can't start a fund. I don't know anyone. I live in a new city in a pandemic. I know 3 people, and now I am an unemployed VC. Like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? And so I was like, well, I'm going to do the best thing I know how to do, which is I got to make some money. Like, girls got to eat, So I studied investment banking. I got into that whole process and I was like, I will learn sell side mergers and acquisitions. I will meet LPs. I will network here. I will get my feet under me, and then I will start a fund. And my passion wasn't investment banking. My passion, though, was I loved working with entrepreneurs and I loved helping them put together deals. And so I was working with Charlotte Triplett. We were collaborating together. We were consulting with medtech founders. We were helping them structure rounds. And then when the time came for them to raise, we were just kind of like structuring a plan and helping them fundraise. So we had all of the components, all the recipe for baking the cake that became Suncoast, but we just didn't have our own fund. And it really hadn't occurred to me to do that. And so I was preparing to sit for my investment banking exam. And a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, Series 65, it'll take you, 2 months to study. Not me. I'm terrible at taking tests. So it took me 8 months to study for that securities exam. And I was getting ready to sit that test. And the lawyer that I was hiring to help me file the stuff and get going as an investment bank was an attorney for an accelerator in LA. And he said to me, you might want to meet these guys. And I was thinking in my head, oh, I'm happy to meet them. This will be any sort of opportunity to connect and, meet people. Maybe they're a good funding source or a partner. And so I agreed to meet with them. Unbeknownst to me at the time, would I become their head of healthcare in just a few months. But I was planning on starting an investment bank. But that really wasn't where my heart was. My heart was in early stage venture capital. And that's really what I wanted. And I wanted to work with founders. So it's kind of funny how the universe put me into that situation where I would be able to do that.
Absolutely. And again, kind of this recurring theme that I've noticed throughout your career, which is really sometimes life happens, but you have to see why it happens and then proceed to go from there. So now you're at this accelerator, you're back in the VC, and luckily you did not go the investment banking route.
Yeah. I thank myself I'm like, thank you. No, not an investment banker.
Right. It happened at the right time for you to not make that decision. But there's still a point where you moved from an accelerator to Suncoast Ventures. So what was that period of acceleration where now you were ruminating and you were thinking, well, maybe a fund is actually the right way to go about this, but you were not yet pulling the trigger? At what point did you said, no, it's now, it's happening?
Yeah. Well, so we started launching cohorts and accelerators. We batched the companies and people started to notice the quality of companies. And they started to notice that the types of companies that myself, as well as Charlotte, who was working with me at the time, were bringing in were novel. They were like, these are not the typical med tech, health tech companies that we might see. You guys are finding really, really interesting deals, really great founder, and so we started getting attention because of the quality of the work. We took our jobs working with these founders extremely seriously. It wouldn't have mattered what accelerator it was at that point because we were kind of an island of healthcare tech, within this accelerator. And we really gave everything we had and could to these founders to help them. I think it was just because that's what we were passionate about. It was the right thing to do. And through that work, it got noticed. And I started having a couple people say, oh, you should start a fund one day. But it was the same thing. Oh, no, I don't know anyone, maybe one day. And I applied to VC Lab, but I actually don't even remember applying, which is really funny. I think I might have done the application in my office, maybe at the end of the workday or something. I can't remember. But obviously, it wasn't a very good application because I don't even remember doing it. But I applied to VC Lab. And when we got accepted, that was sort of this light bulb that I thought, wait a minute, this could be an opportunity to do this. And everyone else seems to think the time is now. And I'm the only one who thinks that I'm not ready. So it was an imposter syndrome thing for sure. And I think that's something that, a lot of us, me included for sure, have had to battle. But I was kind of kicked into it by getting accepted into that program.
Two really great topics, and I want to tackle them individually. imposter syndrome is something we discussed on a number of episodes, and I think each conversation brought a very unique angle to it. So I'm curious to understand, your journey around
Mm-hmm.
that, right? Battling your own self-doubts. Like, is it really like, am I now ready to take on the fiduciary responsibility of other people's money and then return, more than I received in a number of years and make the right decisions every single time? What was your process around getting that confidence and getting that support group around that says, this is happening and
Yeah.
there's no other alternative path for us?
I think that in the beginning, it was more just brute force, like brute force of just saying no. Like it was like the voice that's saying you're not enough, you're not qualified, you don't know how to do this. Who are you to think that this is something that you should be doing? And I just had to tell myself, you belong here. You can do this job. You're just as good as they are. You're actually probably better than that person. And, like you belong here, you belong here, you belong here. And it wasn't until I started to track closely on my own performance because I needed to believe it. I had to have the data. I couldn't just tell myself the story. And so days where I would tell myself the story and then I would look at my data and I would benchmark it against others. And I would say, how am I performing compared to X? How am I performing compared to Y? And I had to start building my own case over time for why I belonged in the room. And, one of the things I tell people that's really hard about venture is you don't know if you're good at your job for many years. Like we really don't know. I've got all these performance metrics I'm tracking on. You don't know. We know once we start returning capital. So I like to take at least once a quarter, dive into the numbers and look very cold, hard, black and white at what's actually going on in order to make sure that I keep a realistic idea, not just of my performance, but also help tamp that imposter syndrome down, that comes up a lot.
For sure. And it's very relevant. I mean, myself, an immigrant, we had a number of individuals on the podcast from different types of backgrounds, right?
Mhm.
Solo GPs who are female or minority or immigrants, and everybody has a different way of creating that support group, that benchmarking group, of working with others towards that shared goal.
Yeah.
And it seems that a recurring theme throughout some of these episodes is VC Lab. So I would want to
Yeah.
spend a second on that, because actually the person who introduced us and was able to get you as a guest on our podcast, Ihar, who also went through VC Lab and a good
Yeah.
friend of mine. I'm curious to learn your experience there and being surrounded by other people who are dealing with their own imposter syndrome and their own journeys and building their own resilience around fundraising in a time where venture funding was really shifting. There was so much happening in the macroeconomic context during that time
Oh my
that
gosh. Yeah.
you weren't really sure if tomorrow is going to look similar to yesterday, right? Like
Mhm.
every day was very, very different than the others. Walk us a little bit through your experience there and the power of working together as a group towards
Yeah.
raising multiple funds.
I mean, I learned in VC Lab that there is a wrong way to go about raising a venture fund. And there is a way that you can set yourself up to be most likely to close. So that was really helpful. It was also helpful because VC Lab, so Mike and Adeo and all them, they've compiled all these numbers and they really want to be able to be a very comprehensive data source about performance for new managers and what new managers actually mean today versus how the global industry at large would define a new manager. And so it was helpful because when I interact in other organizations, I'm being lumped in with and benchmarked against others who aren't like me. And so I continue to feel like, well, this isn't really for me. I don't really belong here. Versus in a lot of the VC lab environments, a lot of the emerging managers and people in the program are like me. So I can say, I do belong here. And now I can start to actually try to learn best practices from these other people because they're not raising a $1 billion private equity fund. They're raising a fund like me, and maybe they're just focusing on ag tech or they're focusing on food innovation or something else. But we're all kind of the same, and we're all going through very similar experiences, even if some people have an easier time fundraising than others or whatever that might be. And then I think one of the things that's helpful too is because VC Lab in 2022, per their numbers, they launched a little under half, I believe, of the emerging funds, the new funds that launched in the country. So their data is comprehensive. So I'm much more apt to trust what they say versus what someone else is telling me. So when they say, Genevieve, you're fine. You're on track. You're doing well. I can breathe easier because I know that I'm with my peers. If I need help, they're there and that I'm on track versus this journey being so lonely. I cannot imagine what it would be like to just wake up one day and be like, I'm going to start a fund and try to do it by myself. I think I'd be lost. And I was lost, I think, and when I look at funds that don't make it, I've kind of gotten to the point because I know so many new managers, I can almost tell you which funds and which managers are going to make it and which ones probably aren't, just based off of what I've seen over the years with my interactions with other managers at VC.
So I'm sensing a mutation of Suncoast Ventures over the next decade or so in a fund of funds. And that's really where the journey's heading.
That's so funny you bring that up. Yeah, so my goal is I'd like to raise 3 funds for Suncoast minimum. I may or may not do sort of like topical specific funds. I would love to have a women's health specific fund one day. The thesis and, the structure and everything like that of Suncoast works really well. So I don't want to change what's working right now, but it's just something I would always love to do. But looking at what VC Lab has done, I just find it very inspiring and extremely impactful. And then meeting a couple LPs who are also fund of funds and getting to see what they do, it's made me think, maybe that's might be where I eventually want to end up, and so raising 3 funds, that's going to be 10 years. I've been very clear with my fiance and the people in my life. I'm like, this is a 10-year ride for sure. I'm giving myself an option to get off at the end, because this is really hard work. And I'm not going to say that I, won't be ready to take a break. But I think I've become really intrigued with this idea of an eventual fund of funds and would like to see maybe things move in that way. We'll see.
Fantastic. So I feel the listeners can say they heard it for the first time on the VCR hit.
Yeah,
So
yeah, they can.
I'm curious to understand. I think it's crazy to think that we're 2/3 into the episode and we haven't had the chance to discuss about the thesis of Suncoast Ventures. And probably the most important question there that's probably on people's minds as they're listening to this. We've heard the journalism background, we've heard the sales background, we've heard the journey into venture and acceleration. But Suncoast Ventures, it's focused on healthcare. At what point during that career healthcare became a interest of you and a part where you really wanted to dedicate your investing and support towards those founders?
Yeah, actually. So I think I got the idea in my head before I even knew what venture capital was. So I was reading a bunch of articles in a news feed one day, and I saw an article about a life-saving therapy or technology, I can't remember what it was, coming out of OHSU, Oregon Health and Science University. And this article was talking about how they had lined up, everything that they needed to go to market, how they had, LOIs and distribution and all this stuff, and how this technology was going to save millions, if not billions of people. And all they needed to do was have a final chunk of funding in order to get through the last milestone of the FDA. And it was going to cost $500,000 and it would take about 6 months. But the company was unable to raise that. And so the technology was going to sit on the shelf and it would never reach the people who were waiting to purchase it, and it would never save the world. And in the same feed aggregator, down the page, I saw an article about some startup in San Francisco that was doing some technology for something. I don't even know what it was, but I remember thinking that I thought it was dumb, and that they had raised $4.5 million. They had burned it all on offices and office furniture and office amenities and all these different things. And they were trying to raise another round. And I remember just thinking, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. What a waste. And I thought, if just 500,000 of that had gone to this company, we could have had something that would have really meant something to the world, and the investors would have made a lot of money. Why would you put the money into this company over here that's not even going to like do anything? And I didn't understand any of this at the time. And so when I found myself working for that one venture fund as a partner where they were doing deep science and intellectual property, I got to get really deep into understanding the process of commercialization, which is not a process that tech companies have to go through per se. So, they build the product and then they sell the product. And in health, they have to basically, products are often built or incubated or created or invented somewhere different by a different team or team composition than the people who take it to market. And that whole process is unique to medtech, healthcare tech, devices, all that. And so getting really into that process and learning about it and getting really into the nuances of it, I started to realize that if I learned that and if I could figure out how to make a funding mechanism work in there, I could create impact that other people weren't creating because the barrier seemed so big. Like people stay away from health because of the complexity of it and the scientific of itness of it. And I thought, if I can get past that, then I can do something truly unique and very impactful. So I think I have the semblances of a foundation to give it a try. And I'm just going to focus on these types of companies because I know how to do those ones and not do, biotech or anything like that. So that's kind of how Suncoast, the inception of Suncoast began.
Interesting. And did you look towards getting that scientific expertise in-house, or how are you thinking about the complementarity of the skills around the fund in order to make the right investment decisions?
Yeah. Well, so when you think about a fund, a lot of health funds in the health industry, they're very specific. So they're like biotechnology, computational biosciences, or drug discovery. And that's because the breadth of knowledge that is required is so specific in order to make those types of investments. And so I was kind of thinking to myself, well, if I'm doing seed funding and we're making smaller bets and smaller checks, and it's about the timing of when we put that money in more so than it is about the check size. It becomes a lot more about check size later. So I thought, in order to get the timing right, I have to understand the industry. And in order to understand the industry, there's no way I could do that alone, or even the smartest person who came in as a partner, Charla, for example, extremely talented engineer, but she still doesn't know everything about everything in this industry. There's no possible way we're going to be able to do this unless we surround ourselves with the right people. So we set up a structure where we basically created a venture partner bench of people with different expertises across a range of disciplines: data science, mathematician, clinical, nursing, engineering. And everyone comes at things with a different angle so that we can not only understand technology at that stage, but so that we can time it properly. And then on top of that, so we have our core team who are all partners in the fund. And it's not me. I usually joke and say, I am the resident VC, because these companies don't really need VCs. At seed stage, you get the timing right, you get the diligence down, and the deal itself is actually relatively straightforward once you figure out how to do it. So that doesn't need to be, we're not doing private equity crossover funding or anything crazy here. So then after that, we started to create an ecosystem. So we said, maybe not people who work with us on the team, but who are involved in our ecosystem and have access and have specific expertise, again, that we can tap on when we need. And then we also brought in LPs. So 70% of our LPs are healthcare industry execs. That's a long-winded way of saying it takes a village. But if you want the diversity, you have in the fund and then in the portfolio, you have to have the diversity of thought and experience.
Absolutely. And I think it's a perfect segue to my last question before we jump into the rapid fire, which is how do you think about value add? And more specifically, how did you design Suncoast Ventures to be best positioned to have founders work with you rather than someone else?
I would say value add has been shown to return higher returns in funds. If there's a fund out there, if there's someone who has money and they would like to deploy it into startups and they don't want to add that much value, that's fine. There's a place for them in the ecosystem. But I think that being able to contribute in some way to a company is, I wouldn't want to invest in any other way. It would feel completely like soulless, I guess. And so the value add starts with the relationship. And the value add begins with how can we connect with these founders in order to help them not fail? And then we've been thinking a lot about that because we're like, we've built this whole ecosystem and we've got all these cake ingredients. What's the cake we're actually going to bake? And one of the areas that we continue to come back to in terms of where we're great at adding value is, well, we have to have the context for the clinical application. We have to understand the workflow. We have to understand the science. And we have to be able to communicate that outward. That's a given. We want to be able to help them be successful. And at the stage that we're coming in, the way that what some of these companies need most is sales, growth, that kind of thing. And so we start looking around and we realize there's not a lot of branded funds or programs specific to health that focus on sales and growth. And maybe we can be that. And it's interesting because it's like that also brings in my background of growth and sales and combining that. So if we can bring that discipline to the table and we can add value there, then that to me is something that we can differentiate with as a fund. And once you have a strong differentiator, your check size and your economics and things like that, they need to work, but they don't matter as much as they would as the value that you bring to the fund, the value that you bring to the founder, and the relationship that you can create around it.
I like this sort of value-driven conclusion that we're reaching as we're approaching the end of this episode around what's truly most important is figure out where you can provide the most differentiated value to those founders, and then everything is built around that.
Yeah. Like there's a nuance there, right? Like you're saying, where can you provide it? A lot of people look and they say, what is the gap in the market? What does the market need? I'm going to do that. That's a way. But it may not be as sustainable as if you can say, my thing that I can do that, is unique to me or is unique to my team is this. And maybe there are other people in the market who do it, and that's okay. But you're going to do it your way, and you're going to do it your own special way, and you're going to do it really well. And so, going to Expert Dojo, launching Cohorts and doing that well, I just continue. Sometimes when I feel a little lost and when I feel a little bit imposter syndrome, I just get back down to be excellent at fundamentals. The fundamentals of investing are actually quite basic. Be excellent at them. Be excellent at, the fundamentals of advising and relationships, and try not to pile on too much. And so anytime I start feeling a little overwhelmed, go back to the fundamentals. What creates value and how is that value created? And go do more of that.
Such a great answer. And I really appreciate you going into this angle as well. As we're wrapping up the episode, we'd love to ask you two rapid fire questions. And one of them has to deal with you, which is what is one thing that a lot of people don't know about Genevieve that they should know about you?
Gosh, don't know, but should know. I think, well, one thing is, I think I am very spiritual. And so a lot of my relationships with founders and with LPs, they're not really centered around our conversations aren't so much around business. I like to connect with people of real things. Who are we? What's the purpose we're trying to create here? I don't like getting stuck and mired in like little details of things. And that's a good thing and a bad thing sometimes. But I like to really understand who people are at their core and really understand why something is being done a certain way. And sometimes that means we invest and sometimes it means we don't invest, but that doesn't have anything to do actually with them or what it is that they're doing. And so I think that's something I wish a lot more people kind of knew when they approached either me or any other investor is when I meet with an entrepreneur, my first thought isn't necessarily about a check. And then if it seems like it's going to make sense, then it becomes about a check. But the first thought is usually about getting to know who is this person and why are they on this journey. And I think that's something that it would be nicer if more entrepreneurs could engage in that way.
Fantastic. And I think there's a whole nother episode that we should be doing around spirituality. I have a lot of questions for you on that note. But as we're ending this one today, we've always asked this question. Who would you like to say thank you for, or who are you most grateful for looking back at your life and career? Unfortunately, you'll have to pick only one person.
Oh man, that's so hard. Actually, so several people popped into my mind in terms of who I'm grateful for. I thought of my partner, Charla. I thought of my other partners, Ray, Hal, Tammy. But the person that I would like to talk about gratitude for today is a guy named Chris Capdevilla. And he's an angel. He's an investor. He is the person who called me that day that I was getting a Euro sandwich and told me he thought I should become a VC. And he's also the person who taught me. And he was very patient. And he gave me a seat at the table. And he challenged me patiently when I needed to be challenged. He gave me every resource that I needed in order to learn this. I don't think it was ever his intention that I become a GP and start fund. I don't think that was his thing, but that is what he did. And I am very forever grateful to him. And, I've written him a letter and, things like that. But, I want to share, he gave me an opportunity and he may not have realized what he was doing, but he did. And I am eternally grateful to that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with us. It was beautiful, insightful, transparent, and honest at its core, which I think make up a great story to tell about how someone got to where they are right now. And hopefully people take that story and get inspired following their own journeys and create more funds and bring a more diverse group of people around the table to support the next generation of founders. So thank you, Genevieve, so much for taking the time to do this today.
Thank you. It's very kind words. I really appreciate that. And it was wonderful to come on today. And I'm glad we got to have this conversation. So thanks.
What a great conversation. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like and subscribe to our podcast and be on the lookout for a new episode in 2 weeks featuring another amazing fund manager and their story. This podcast was made possible by Flowlie. If you're a fund manager, angel investor, family office, or syndicate lead who receives a lot of deals or simply wants help sorting through the noise, create a free account today on Flowlie at flowlie.com. That's FLOWLIE.com, and get access to an AI-assisted deal screening engine and network manager that will dramatically improve how you work. Are you ready to take your investing journey to the next level and join hundreds of investors across the globe who use the platform every single day? Find the discount code in the show notes and sign up today. That's it for today's episode. See you next time.